All right, atheism. First question to ask is, when you're discussing atheism, which God are you rejecting? So oftentimes an atheist will say something like, I don't believe in God because God is evil, God is angry, God is unjust, God is unfair, God is not loving. And the response of any religious person would be, well, I don't believe in that God either. So the atheist and the religious person agree that they reject that God. So how you define God is of paramount importance. And that is the question of theology. That's why theology is so important. That's why religious studies are so important. Because the definition of God is everything. Talking about who you believe God to be is everything, because if you define God a certain way, well, perhaps the atheist agrees on your definition of God. And perhaps the religious and the atheist reject the same God. One of the most common things, as I mentioned last class, that an atheist will bring up is the problem of evil, theodicy, that suffering exists. How can God exist if God is good? We spent many sessions on that. I won't get into it. There are answers. It often tends to be something like, evil befell me. Evil happened to me or my family or something like that. And so God can't exist and God can't be good. So perhaps it's more of an emotional push at times. Other times, a person's own experience, an atheist's own experience, can be projected onto their image of God. And so it's something like, if I haven't experienced a lot of love, well, I might conclude that God doesn't exist, or God exists and he's not loving, because where is love? Or if I've only experienced people who are angry constantly all my life, well, then I project that onto God. God is an angry God. And so I sort of project my experiences back onto an image of God without actually looking into the definition of God. Again, theology. Our perceptions of God become warped by our experiences. Next, atheism and morality. You can be a morally sound person, can be a good person if you are an atheist. You cannot defend your moral stances if you are an atheist. Remember, we went through the absolute versus relative morality. You can have all of these standards and rules for being a good person as an atheist. But when it comes to an atheist talking to an atheist, for example, and if they disagree on something, to what do they then appeal? If it's logic, logic won't get you to agree. Because you can have, one person will say, well, murdering is wrong, and the other person will say, yeah, but we have a population crisis. And actually, if we murder enough people, then the entire planet will be better off. Or I have 5 people sick in the hospital and I need to kill one really healthy person to harvest the organs enough for those 5 people. 5 people are better than 1. Logic. Logic won't always work if you don't have something higher to appeal to. And that's something of what we see in moral issues, moral dilemmas in our society today. We reach stalemates, ethical stalemates. Abortion is one of them. No, I am for life. No, I am for choice. Well, everybody loves choice and everybody loves life. There's sort of silly conclusions. The problem is that the foundation, the fundamentals, we're at disagreement with. And so an atheist will have a difficult time defending any moral claim. Another way of thinking about it is an atheistic argument for a moral claim would be something like, I think killing is wrong because life is good. And then you'd have to ask, well, why is life good? Well, life is good because death is bad. Okay, why is death bad? Because death is a painful process. Okay, so pain is bad. Why is pain bad? Well, pain is bad because everybody agrees that it's bad. Well, does majority always dictate? What if an entire society, right, Nazi Germany, has a particular opinion? What if the world all of a sudden has a particular opinion that obviously seems bad, but people are just in a craze? Well, majority doesn't always win. Okay, well then let's stay at pain is wrong, is bad. Suffering is bad. Okay, well you still have to justify why. You always have to justify why. And unless you have something outside, an outside standard, i.e. God, then you won't be able to defend your moral claim. Next, religion requires faith. Atheism requires faith. Religion requires evidence. Atheism requires evidence. You see, both atheism and religion require faith and evidence. And any form of religion, or at least any form of Christianity that tells you otherwise, is, from a theology professor, incorrect. It's obvious that religion requires faith. it's obvious that atheism requires evidence. The opposites might not be so obvious. Where does atheism require faith? Well, it requires faith in a lot of things. And we started talking about this last class when we talked about how the majority of what you believe in is actually based on experience, not on evidence. One easy example is the creation of the universe. If you are an atheist, you must believe, it's not optional, you must believe that all things came into existence out of nothing on their own. It takes a lot of faith to believe that. And if you're a Christian, you must believe that all things came into existence out of non-existence by God. That also requires faith. So there are certain things that just require faith because there is no amount of experimentation that will prove anything to you. Also, the universe has order and beauty and organization. And if you don't believe in a God who put that order, you must believe it was by chance. Just like you must believe that a watch on the side of the road that you pick up must have come together and is able to tell time entirely on its own, randomly, by chance. It would be very unlikely. Same when you see a universe that is structured in order and beauty and organization, you would probably say there is a universe maker. You wouldn't say it happened randomly and by chance. So something like that, if you think it's randomly and by chance, would require some level of faith in something. This is one of C.S. Lewis's points. He says that if you are an atheist, you must believe this following fact. All people in the entire history of humanity who have ever had any notion of anything divine or supernatural have 100% been entirely wrong. He says you can believe that, but it's highly unlikely that everybody has just gotten things entirely wrong. And of course, the atheistic worldview will say, yes, they did get everything wrong because they've been using it as a crutch to get them through the difficulties of life. And you can have that perspective. It's probably unlikely that everybody has just been using it as a societal construct or a crutch. And it's probably more likely that at least one human being in the billions upon billions that have ever existed have had some sort of supernatural experience or experience of the divine. But again, it's not an absolute fact. It is just something that you have to accept as an atheist. Another interesting thought is that the observation that human desire is never fully satisfied. It's something that atheists have to grapple with. Why is human desire never satisfied? Why is it not the case that if I pile up my own desires, if I get all the food I ever wanted, the delicacies I ever wanted, all of the money I ever wanted, all of the cars I ever wanted, all of the job and the status, the respect and the recognition, right? Celebrity status, I have a nice family, everything is fine and happy and hunky-dory. There's this common experience across religious traditions that there's still something missing. There's still this void that's experienced. The observation that humans are never fully satisfied and that this void continuously persists points many religious people to the belief that there is something that exists beyond them that fulfills them. Because from a strictly physicalist worldview, where you believe that only matter matters, that only what is physical matters, you should find something, drugs, right? Being high all the time. Something should keep you satisfied. But the fact that it doesn't might point to the idea that there's more. Maybe there's a soul that needs to be filled or satisfied. Maybe there's a spirit that needs to be filled or satisfied somehow. And that's often the impetus for people who pursue religion, pursue spirituality. It's because of this void. The West went towards atheism head first. Atheism all the way. Physicalist all the way. It's sort of backfiring a little bit. There's a spiritual but not religious movement that we're going to talk about at the end of the semester. The spiritual but not religious movement doesn't want to believe in God. They still want to be atheists, but they still feel like something's missing. So they're pursuing spiritual nourishment. So this void exists. And if you're an atheist, you have to grapple with why it exists and what fixes it. Again, this is not a lecture convincing you not to be an atheist. This is showing you the difficulty of being an atheist and what you have to grapple with if you are an atheist. Because I don't want you to be dishonest with yourself and think you're an atheist when you're not. Because atheism requires a lot of work, especially a lot of intellectual work. you might have a sense that you are more than atoms or molecules or cells or matter. You might have that sense. And oftentimes that sense is the impetus for people's religious pursuit. Oftentimes in the face of death, people come to this realization, or the death of a loved one, where you realize they are more than just their body. There's something else. So oftentimes people have religious awakenings around suffering and around death. Next, we've talked about science and religion a lot throughout the semester, faith and reason. Primarily, they are compatible. At least in the Catholic intellectual tradition, this is very much pushed. And so anything that you might find to be problematic, there are explanations for. The Big Bang Theory, right? We said Thomas Aquinas probably would have explained it as, thanks for telling us the mechanism by which God created the universe, right? There's evidence for neither. And if you discover the mechanism, it is simply a scientific explanation of how it happened, but it is not the why. Same with evolutionary theory. The same with the biblical timeline and dating humanity, dating different ages of the universe, etc. There's this inherent compatibility. Things can be made sense of. And lastly, humans have something distinct about them. This is a very interesting point. So in the Christian perspective, humans are created in the image and likeness of God. I asked you at the beginning of the semester, what do you think that means? And we came to some conclusions like they have freedom, creativity, there's something unique about them. They have consciousness, conscience, they have a subconscience. They are able to think abstractly. So humans are able to think about our own thinking. And that seems to be unique. It doesn't seem that any other animal in the animal kingdom is able to do the same thing. We are aware of our own existence. We can have existential crises, right? Psychological breakdowns. The awareness of our existence seems to be unique to humans. We have a sense of the divine, of the supernatural, which again, other animals don't seem to have, which would point to the distinction and uniqueness of humans. And I think the most interesting one is that humans can act contrary to their own flourishing. So the tree outside must be a tree. It cannot just decide that today I want to be a dog, right? It cannot just act contrary to its own nature. It can also not say, you know what, there's sun being given to me, but I reject you, sun. I want not to grow. Or I don't want to absorb any nutrients from the soil. I reject your nutrients. If there's toxins, maybe it'll reject it, but it must be a tree and it must function according to its nature. Same with the rest of creation. Humans, on the other hand, can do whatever they want. You can act contrary to your own flourishing. You can say, today I will not be human, right? You can be animalistic, you can be bestial, you can say, I'm going to eat things that will give me coronary heart disease, or I will not eat at all and I will starve myself to death, right? You can do whatever you want. You can hurt yourself physically, psychologically. You can hurt other people. You can hurt your species. So we can act contrary to our own flourishing. It's very unique. It's not a great thing, but it might point to a unique freedom that humans have, perhaps in the Christian perspective, created in the image and likeness of God. From a Christian perspective, they would say something like, God fulfills human nature, and so those things that are good for humans bring you closer to God, or the things that God commands brings you closer to human flourishing. That which is good for a human is that which brings you closer to God, is that which makes you more human. Violence would bring you down on either of these scales. It would make you less human, make you further from God, make you worse. So it should all be the same actions. Now the question is, what are those actions? Christians would say those actions are those things commanded by God. And atheists will say, well, you appeal to reason, right? The idea is that humans can act contrary to their nature. They can choose to go on the downward path, away from humanity. And that might point to something distinct, unique about humans made in the image and likeness of God.